I am Nivedita Indrajit and I'm talking to Sujata Ameya. And she's the one who introduced me to something called choice. I met you around 10 years ago and, uh, and at a workshop demo, which one of my dance partners introduced me to and said, you should go and attend this workshop. I'm like, workshop? I've never attended workshops. So when I came to your workshop and we did an exercise with the thread and all and boundaries and stuff, and suddenly the pop came in my head that I have choice. So that is my introduction to you, choice maker, and a person who can facilitate choice in other people's life. So thank you for having this conversation with me.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure and my honor to be called for a conversation of this nature. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So I'd like to know, like you've had 30 years or plus experience in psychology, psychotherapy, and all that, right? So how did you, I mean, did you get into it like directly, or was there any other options available to you when you were a kid?
Okay. So by the way, let me correct that. I have 28 years experience.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I like to add my training into it and make it 30, but no,
Okay.
actually. so, so when we were studying in my time, the classic options were science and maths. So you either became a doctor or an engineer, and the second tier would be a lawyer or an architect or a chartered accountant.
Okay.
Anything other than that was meant for the not so good students. And
Okay.
humanities especially was like for those who just can't do it. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, I was a very good student. I did by PC. I got very good marks, but I was just not interested in doing medicine at all. So there was a lot of cajoling and forcing, but I said no. I think by then I had recognized that people simply sit and talk to me. People
Mm,
who are younger, older, much older. When I used to travel, the passenger next to me also, anyone,
mm,
men,
mm.
women, they would just keep talking. And I knew that there was something I have, or something about me that allows that. And what was that? What is that thing? Was my quest. So by then, luckily, I knew there is a field called psychology, and I had to fight a lot to get into a BA where I could happily do an MBBS and an MD. But I did it, and I'm so glad and so grateful that I could do that. That I followed the path that I did. Yeah. So that's how it came up.
So you were abroad for a while to study?
That was no. That was much later. Much later.
Okay.
My studies entirely happened in Hyderabad till my master's in psychology, Osmania University.
Mm,
And then for my MPhil in clinical psychology, I went to NIMHANS, Bangalore, which is the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences.
mm.
Um, there, the training is similar to psychiatry,
Okay.
but of course, clinical psychologists do not prescribe medication. So it
Okay.
has to do more with counseling and psychotherapy. So abroad was much later. That was after I had established a really solid clinical practice here.
Huh.
My husband then he wanted to go abroad, so we left and we were there for about 5 years.
And did having children change the way you approached your work?
Well, yes and no. In the sense, no one tells you before you have children as to what it means.
Yeah.
You know, you're a parent for life. You're a parent until I think you die.
Yeah.
So the kind of time and emotional investment it takes to become a parent, I think no one ever tells you that. So yes, I think in the initial years, it was pretty much a circus kind of thing, trying to balance this and that. but also it has changed me as a person. I feel, I just
Yeah,
feel I have come more into myself, more grounded, more living the principles that I have held as ideals,
yeah,
more closer to the earth, literally, and more in touch with the feminine side. So it's a gift and it's a challenge, both,
yeah,
especially when they're very young.
yeah.
Yeah.
And also, like when I met you, right, you were doing the self-discovery program for 100 hours. I remember this very clearly.
Yes.
Art
Yes.
and science of self-actual. It became art and science of self-actualization, and I did. It was called authentic dialogue, and
Correct.
it has transformed. I think even before that, you said it's transforming itself, and then I'm sure in the last 10 years, it's transformed more. Can you tell
Yes.
more about the program and who can actually be part of it? I mean, who can actually choose?
Sure. Surely. So, one of my gifts that I discovered very early on, I used to tutor my cousin who used to live with us, my younger brother. I
Okay.
realized that I teach very well. And
Huh.
in fact, it is my unconscious competence. At 3 a.m. in the morning, even if I'm rubbing my eyes, I know I can do a great job in teaching. And teaching is not just, the standard blackboard kind of a didactic teaching, not just that. I think I bring a creative approach to communicating uh, complicated or experiential ideas in a way that the person carries that understanding with them in their body, not just in their mind. Yeah. So because of my own love of teaching, when I started practice, there was hardly anybody in private practice as a clinical psychologist, or perhaps I was the only one in private practice at the time. We are talking 1991. Okay. The other people were usually attached to either a psychiatric hospital or a private practicing psychiatrist, right? So many youngsters or many other people who miss the bus. What I mean by that is they love psychology, they have an innate interest, they are gifted, they are the shoulder that people lean on when they are in trouble, but they don't have the formal training to become counselors. So such people used to come and ask whether I would take them on in turn or teach them or something. So that's how the course began. It began as a experiential workshop to teach the basic skill of listening for the experience and asking questions in such a way that the person finds their own inner wisdom. Not that you need to give them advice, not that you need to direct or guide them, but listen and question them about the issue in such a way that they find their own answers. So that's how it began. So early on it used to be called PG Diploma in Psychological Counseling Skills. It was kind of run in collaboration with a small private body at the time.
Okay.
Then slowly I came away out of it, and it became different names. It was called Integrated Counselor at one time. It was called Authentic Dialogue at another time, Dialogue for Transformation at another time. But I think in the last 8-9 years, it has remained steady because I feel it's found its niche, and that is the whole path and purpose of self-actualization.
Right.
This term, self-actualization, although it is coined by Maslow, it is there in all our ancient traditions and our texts and our scriptures as well. The whole purpose of existence, of human existence, namely the purusharthas, this is that actually. How do I discover who I am? How do I engage with others and the world? And then how do I reconnect with what I'm supposed to be doing in this life, or why am I here? It's a very fundamental question. So
Right.
what I discovered is in helping someone else, you can actually learn a lot about yourself. So I never tire of saying this, who I am today, 80% of that credit goes to my clients. The amount I learn from simply listening to the struggles that people have, and in trying to do my best in helping them, showing them the mirror, the depth and the profundity of learning that comes is incredible. So I was like, conversation and helping someone feel better, that itself can be your path to your own deep self, to self discovery, to personal growth, to self actualization. So now, over all these years, all these principles, all these ideas that I have learned, I have created activities which are embodied kind of, uh, you know, things that people do, games or exercises or dyadic work or triadic work, where they're instructed to do something to get the meaning of what is it like. So for example, when we talk about empathy,
Yeah.
there is enough on Google about what is empathy, but I doubt if anyone really understands the core thing of it. But in the class, the way we put people through those activities, they get bits and pieces that stays in their memory, that remains in their muscle memory. So I think it's very rewarding when today people who have done the course way back in 90, first batch was in 95, so way back from there, even today on a regular basis, I keep receiving small messages saying, I had this case today, I did this today, I had this fight today, I had that issue today, and what you said in the class that day, this day, that really came and it helped me. Thank you so much. So it's very rewarding, very reassuring. So we have more than 300 alumni of the course so far. We have a Facebook group called Inner Horizons Alumni. And most of them are practicing. Some of them are counselors. Some of them have gone on to become coaches. They have taken on coaching credentials as well. And some, like you, have become healers. And it's been beautiful. So that's the workshop. Now you also asked, who is it meant for? So like I said, this workshop serves two purposes. One is it can be used exclusively for your own self-development. You're just curious about who you are, what's going on with you, uh, uh, what is stuck with you, what is it that you're looking to overcome, what are you trying to discover about yourself. It could be a self-inquiry kind of a process. It also teaches you the skills of doing the same for somebody else, enabling the attitude of growing through whatever you go through. The tagline is grow through whatever you go through. That is the tagline. So it
Okay.
also teaches you skills of how do you enable that for another person who is in the middle of a crisis, who's having some issue or not, doesn't matter. So how can you use conversation for deepening into yourself, you know? That's the thing.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And I think the time that when we did that, we were also asked to do a course separately in psychology or something for a 1 year
Yes.
in St. Francis College, so that it
Yes.
adds to the.
Yes. No, not necessarily St. Francis College. So what the course that I teach is a hands-on thing in terms of the skill aspect of counseling. But to make it legal and viable, and to look at it as a valid and certified kind of a course, I always have recommended that the students, those who are serious to take it up as counseling, get a master's in psychology. So that master's can be from an online program, a distance education, any Indian university, UGC recognized university that gives you a master's in psychology. That would be a helpful add-on to this, because
Yeah.
see, everyone who does MA psychology comes and tells me they teach you nothing. They teach you nothing about this human interaction,
Yeah,
counseling, listening,
the
empathy,
practical parts of it.
nothing at all. Yes. So but it's a recognized degree. So I always say that, you get the degree, you learn the skill, then you're good to go as a practitioner. But if you're not interested in practicing, this is enough. This will give you tools for the rest of your life to keep playing around with. As you said, something or the other keeps coming up when you're in the midst of that, right? Yeah.
And you've recently written a book and it's been published, The Beloved.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Yes.
And I've read
Um,
the epilogue, I've read the poems, and I think I love the poem Gratitude.
okay.
That is there, and
Okay.
the words that have been said. There's a lot of information, and I feel it can be. If I had a physical copy of the book, I would just open it one day and read whichever will make sense for that day. That's the energy I get when I play with that book. Not just as a
That.
read.
Let me grab a copy of it. Let me grab a copy.
Pardon me?
No, I said, if you don't mind, let me grab a copy of it just to show.
Okay.
Yeah, 1 second.
Yeah. Okay. The book.
So yes, this is how it looks as a physical copy, paperback. Yeah,
Yeah.
when the
Yeah.
beloved calls, and that's the backside. Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, I think someone like you will realize that. But I do want to say you're right. The book actually, the constant feedback I've been getting is they use it as something like an oracle.
Yeah.
Something like if they when they wake up, they have something going on in their mind, and they just open it to some poem, and that's been very meaningful. That can be very directional, or that can be very reassuring, or different ways, different things are happening for people. Yes. So what was your question about the book again?
I wanted to know how it evolved into writing because I know the epilogue. I mean, unless people buy the book and read the epilogue, they'll know how the book happened. But for
They might.
record, for the
Yeah.
video kind of a thing. So
Yeah. Yeah. So this is, I think, uh, what do I say? A very important milestone in my journey. That's how I would look at it. So, as you know, I was married. I'm no longer married. I was married for 20 long years. And in 2014, I think uh, we were legally separated. I was minding my own business, and the rest of the story is there in the epilogue. What I discovered was when you uh, believe that you have fallen in love for someone, usually we take that energy outwards and go chasing the person. But in my case, that was not possible. First of all, because this person doesn't even, I mean, he's across the oceans in another continent altogether. And this person till date has no clue that someone has fallen for him like this in his, and because one, there was no opportunity. Two, my children were small. I was wounded. I did not even have a iota of energy to think of another relationship. It was just impossible. Because I think when you get married and when you have children, you give it your 100% plus another 100% plus another 100%. There's nothing left, is the feeling you have. So when you don't turn that energy outwards and go chasing the person or the possibility there, you will have to turn it inwards and go in and see what happens. So I think that thing, partly circumstantial, partly by choice, got me in touch with a part of me that I didn't know existed. A part of me that is capable of such intensity, such depth, such ecstasy, such deep longing, such fragmentation, and such coming back again. It is just like a roller coaster ride in Disneyland, I would say. And over the years, it taught me that both parts of the ride are good. The going up and the coming down both have their own
yeah,
different quality of excitement and intensity. And what happened was, as and this is something I felt I couldn't go and talk to anybody about or explain to anybody or do anything. So I thought maybe I should write, and then this poetry just kept coming. So I used to simply write and post on Facebook. Nothing at all, just like that. It would come, I would write it. Then in my contacts, there happened to be this gentleman who was an editor with the group that published it. It's called Envision Earth Media. So he would religiously like and love and comment on those poems, and he would say things like, "These are very deep. These remind me of Rumi." And I'm like, I've heard of Rumi, but I really haven't read much of him, except the quotes that go around. He said, "No, no, no, we should publish." I was like, even that idea was very alien to me. I was just writing because that was my experience. But he persisted. He persisted for a good 2-3 years. He said, "No, there is depth in these poems. There's value. We must publish. We must publish." I said, "Okay, fine." So that's how the book came along. I call it a unplanned baby, literally, because the writing of the poems was far more easier than compiling them and going through them, editing them, and then sending them for the publishing and getting the book. And once you switch out of that mode into the action mode of getting things moving, it's a very different energy.
Yeah.
So, but then after all that, it came out last year. In June, the Kindle version came, and in September, the paperback came, this one.
Yeah.
And this is, of course, only for Indian readers. The outside of India, you have to go on Envision Earth website and place an order. So it's printed on demand. It's called POD.
Okay.
So only those who ask for it will be given a print. I think the media house is committed to this green earth idea, so they don't believe in printing and stocking,
Right.
which is great.
Yeah, which is a
So
nice thing,
yes,
actually.
yes, absolutely. So that's how the book came about.
Oh, this is so beautiful. I want to actually say something like Rabindranath Tagore wrote Gitanjali the same way.
Yeah.
In the sense, he transformed whatever he was going through or whatever is his experience, and whatever it is, he converted it into Gitanjali. So when I see, I'm not comparing the works or they're saying they're same, but that is what I see when I read the book, or that is what
Thank
I
you.
perceive.
Thank you so much. I also want to say another thing, and I think this is becoming clear to me later, much later. See, even when I wrote the poems, I never used to think that I am writing.
Yeah.
It would just come. Whoever has been reading the book, and some people have been so kind and generous to pre-read before the publishing and give their endorsements, etc. Uniformly, everyone has mentioned how it reminds them in some way about the bhakti poetry, or the Mira. Mira has been mentioned a lot,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and all the bhakti poetry basically. So I think the urge to commune with something higher than you, or the urge to just be one with someone, is
Yeah,
a universal human need. And I
right.
think if you really go into the depth of it without frittering away that energy in this, that, and the other,
Yeah.
I think you touch that, the taste of divine in that. And it is a
And
very
it is
transformative
delicious.
experience. It is delicious. It is delicious, and it can be very distressing also.
Yeah,
So as I say in the blurb on the back, both love and longing, they are two sides of the same coin. You can't feel one without feeling the other, and each has its own depth of richness, right? So they go hand in hand.
so there has been, like, when you read some poems, it's like it stirs something within, and it's probably even unearthing something related to it as an individual.
Yes.
So I mean, I would highly recommend using that for an oracle for a year at least. Or I don't know if you have a program around it or a blue book facilitation around it, or
So here's the thing. What happened was, it just came out in September last year. The first book launch, the first 2 or 3 book launches happened in Mumbai, thanks to a couple of very, very good and dear friends. Then December, there was a book launch in Hyderabad. Jan, it was meant to be in Delhi. From there, it went downhill, thanks to the weather and then to COVID, right? So by book launch, what I meant is not the typical thing that most book launches do. This is by invitation, small groups of people who come, read, listen, ask, and it's a very intimate kind of conversation. So there I have been asked the same thing that you're asking, like, do you plan to do a book club reading or a personal growth process using the book? I think I would like to do that. I would definitely like to do that. Hopefully sometime soon I will start. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, yes.
You can hear me? Okay. So one of the very touching feedback I got from about this book was a very dear friend. She said she was doing some kind of a sadhana with Shivji, Shiva. She said, I decided after seeing this book that I'm going to do it for 64 days because there are 64 poems. And every morning I will offer one poem at his feet. And I'm like, thank you. So different people are doing different things with it. Some of them have started reading it out to their own personal beloveds. It is, their spouses or the people they are in relationship with. Some of them read it out to the divine. Some of them believe that it is the divine's message to them for that day. Because as you said, they open the book in the morning and check. So it seems to be doing its own thing. But yes, I would like to do a book process around it, with a close group of people. Yes, that's a
Yeah.
good idea.
Yeah, and also you have been working with a lot of couples, and I think in the journey, what I mean, I know that there is no how to, or there is no blueprint to understand how relationships can work. But what are the consistent areas that you come across when people are in conflict with each other?
Okay, so this is
Huge.
as a therapist, this is my favorite question. Yeah, because I think once you have the two models to explain this, ones which have evolved over the years of working, they're not from any book. I think once you fit here, things can be quite simple, right? So I would not list out the areas of conflict like this makes people fight. It's never like that. There are broad, what do I say? Baskets, components, whatever you want to say. There are 4 different things which are at the bottom of every conflict. So no matter which conflict you take, it will fall into one of these 4 baskets. Right? So one is physicality, that is physical compatibility. This includes, but it's not restricted to only sexual intimacy. It is the comfort of physically being near somebody, right? So sharing the same room, sitting on the same sofa, eating from the same plate, if needed, hugging, touching, hitting, pinching, rolling over, falling over, being close, holding hands, kissing, all of these, not just sex, right? So if this thing is healthy and going well for a couple, that ensures that there's not too much conflict happening. If there is conflict, this could be one of the reasons.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. Second one would be finances, financial security. By that, what I mean is, of course, as you understand, it's a very personal thing. Some people can be secure with 10 lakh rupees in the bank. Some want 500 crores. That's a personal matter. But the sense of we are okay, both of us are okay financially, we are not going to go on the streets. That stability is very, very important for a long-term, intimate relationship, whether it is cohabitation or marriage, doesn't matter. Yeah? So that's the thing. Now, if they're having trouble in some area, somewhere they're fighting, it can be because of this area, this pillar as well. Yeah.
Okay.
The third thing is shared values. This is a big one. By this, what I mean is, see, one of the tragedies that has happened in the modern era, especially in the last 30 years for India and perhaps 50, 60 years abroad, is that people believe that romance has to do with two people finding each other, somehow finding the special one and meeting. And that's it. Then life is just delightful. Actually, what happens is when you meet like this, after a point, you start going this way.
Yeah.
It doesn't sustain.
It is motion and action.
Yes, what sustains is once you find that person, you both need to turn towards something that is commonly your pursuit. That is a shared dream, a shared vision, a shared value, a shared purpose, something. It has to be something beyond the two of you.
Right.
For most people, it is the children and their welfare, which is fine, but which is quite limiting because uh, who you are as individuals tends to get subsumed to who you are as parents. So until the children need you, that becomes a common purpose. But even before that, or definitely after that, I think it's important for the couple to introspect and understand and communicate what is it that they would like to put their energy to, because you can't keep
Yeah.
looking at each other all your life. It's
Yeah.
not possible. You'll have to
True.
look at something else together.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the direction has to be in the same direction, right? So that is to do with shared values. One of my favorite example is, which school should we put the kid to? So if you're from Hyderabad, the fight can be between an Oak Ridge and a Vidyaranya. So they're not fighting about the school, nor are they fighting about the fees, nor are they fighting about the commute. They're actually fighting about something very deep, which is a value system, which is to do
Yeah.
with one parent wanting the child to be prepared for this competitive cutthroat world, and go do all the achievement based things that are required. The other parent values the more softer sensual things: beauty, art, craft, human connection, singing, music, those kinds of things. So that's the dilemma. That's the value system clash,
Right.
right? That's the third basket. The fourth basket would be uh, social identity. This is especially more applicable now. By that, what I mean is, individually, both the partners can have their own identity. So this one
Okay.
must be so and so and so and so, and she is something else and something else. They can have their own exquisite networks and careers and identity and earning and all that is there. But do these people together show up as a couple? Are they invited as a couple? Do they go as a couple? Do they enjoy hanging out as a couple? Do they have activities together as a couple, either in their official professional networks and also in their social and
Person.
community networks, family
Okay.
networks, extended
Okay.
networks? Because I
Okay.
think the ecosystem is a massive, what do you say, holding space or a container for marriages to sustain, to exist. Actually, marriages which do not have a solid ecosystem tend to unravel faster when there is conflict, when there is trouble. So these are the four areas that you have to look at when something is going on. So they can come with any problem. They can say she talks too much to my sister and she's not spending time with me, or oh, he's the mother's son and he doesn't talk to me. Anything, any presenting complaint will come down to these four things. So then we look at and understand what is the deal for each of them, and then how do we find a common ground? How do we then come together on that clarity, on that understanding? Yeah. So this
Okay.
is the thing. Yeah, I hope that answers your
Yeah.
question.
So my question is also like generally off late, especially there's people talking about MySpace.
Yes,
So yeah, my space, my personal space,
yes, yes.
personal interests and pursuits. So when you're talking about these two people meeting and
Mm-hmm.
looking at something of a shared
Mm-hmm.
value, does that also include the
Mm-hmm.
personal space of whatever they want to look on their own, or how does that come into equation over
Oh,
here?
absolutely. Absolutely. See, I think this is one of the great misconceptions we have, that if a person exists as an individual, it is dangerous to the relationship, or a good relationship requires that you sacrifice yourself as an individual. You
Right.
couldn't be farther from the truth. A strong relationship is possible only when both these things are strong. Your sense of autonomy has to be strong, and your sense of attachment has to be strong.
Yeah.
So, in fact, in my classes, I use a PPT where you plot uh, autonomy on the bottom
Mm.
and you plot attachment on the y-axis.
Mm.
So you have low autonomy, low attachment. You have a very loose, apathetic kind of a relationship.
Okay.
You have high attachment but low autonomy. You have very entangled relationships. They're just caught up between themselves. They're
Right.
good times, bad times, fighting, making up. They're just there.
Yeah.
Then you have high autonomy but poor attachment. Then these are relationships where one or both partners are kind of indifferent, kind of apathetic. They're just pulling along. Something is going on, that kind of a thing. Whereas the last quadrant, where you're high on autonomy and very high on attachment, those are the couples where there is true intimacy, because they know themselves very well. They are able to respect and honor the space of the other person as well. And so a clear communication and negotiation of what each one wants and how much each one can give to the other is possible.
Right.
So personal space is not contrary to relationship. Clarity about personal space, clarity about personal boundary, and the ability to communicate that without making the other person wrong
Right.
goes a long way in having a vibrant relationship. See, because as two different people, you can also grow each other. You
Right.
don't have to be blended like a Siamese twin. It's not necessary, not recommended at all, actually.
Yeah. In fact, two large trees cannot grow in each other's shadow. Right.
Yes,
That's what Khalil
yes,
Gibran says
yes,
about marriage.
absolutely. Yes, and he's right. He's
Yeah.
absolutely right. Yes, yes.
So there is also this whole conversation that happens in psychology classes and stuff like that about dysfunctional family systems
Mhm.
and how one needs to break away from that and create a system that is functional. Or it's like a very scientific way of putting things. How do you actually are able to enable children to see that while we are actually going through this process
So
of transformation?
yeah. So let me start off by saying that uh, except in a psychology textbook, I have not met a single functional family. so, so the idea of this so-called functional family is a composite theory. I don't
Yeah,
think such a thing exists anywhere
correct.
worldwide. This is
But
not
it's
just
made so significant in
exactly. Yes, so I'm coming to that, right? So the whole concept of, oh, that is dysfunctional, this is, so you have to break away. You have to, I don't think you can break away. I don't think you can break away from anything that you're brought up with. Your parents and their parenting methodology is in your DNA. You don't break away. What you do is you make it conscious by looking at it, and then by using your rational ability to bring about change gradually, because you're also unlearning a habit of so many years in trying to do that. So I would look at it this way: a dysfunction is anything that is causing you to lose your personal power. Okay, that is the meaning of at the bottom line. Like I was talking about the baskets in the previous model, in this one that's the bottom line. When you say something is dysfunctional, what you're actually saying is, in this system, and marriage is a system, family is a system, community is a system, the country is a system, everything, the world is a system. In these so systems, like natural systems, have their own principles to work well. And one of the principles is the basic principle is about equilibrium. No matter what is going on in the system, it will keep trying to bring it back to equilibrium. And sometimes in unnatural systems, human system being one of them, the equilibrium is often brought at the cost of something else. In natural systems, that will never happen. In human systems, it happens partly because we have choice. So one person will justify himself by saying, for the larger good, I will sacrifice myself, which is great if it was only possible and true. But along with the sacrifice, just underneath the great positivity of sacrifice rides the negativity of resentment. So that also comes in the system, right? So it may look like it's functioning, but there is dysfunction. Why? If we go back to the definition of dysfunction, it is because it is costing somebody their personal power.
Right.
Now, why is personal power so important? It has to do with integrity. And by integrity, I'm not talking about a moral or a religious or an ethical idea. That just complicates the matter. Integrity is a very basic, fundamental, functional workability idea. It has to work. Like, for example, there is this clock. If some parts of it are taken out so that it can fit into a small square in the cupboard, it has lost its integrity.
Correct.
In order to fit into that slot, it has taken out and broken some parts, and now it is sitting there. It's no longer integrated.
Such a beautiful example.
So now what? How much of a watch is it? How reliable is a watch? Is it? Is
Yeah.
it going to last? Is it really going to tell the time correctly? Is it going to mess up? So now you have the ripple effects of loss of integrity.
Yeah.
Right? So that is what we mean by loss of personal power. So personal power has to do with integrity, and yes, it is not this simple in complex situations like marriage, family, society. I understand that, but I think at least if you know this, you are more likely to choose in a way that you retain your integrity, so that you retain your personal power, so that you're true to yourself, so that you can be at least true to somebody. If you're not true to yourself, you cannot be true to anybody else. It's as
Right.
simple as that, right? So coming to your question, dysfunctionality shows up in the clinical space as unhappiness, anxiety, depression, resentment, frustration, all of those symptomatology. What is that? Ultimately, bottom line, it comes down to one or both partners acting out of integrity. And often this is because we are afraid. We are afraid of hurting the person. We are afraid of losing our space. We are afraid of losing privileges. We are afraid of losing approval. We are afraid of losing an image that we have constructed of ourselves. So it's all a process of unraveling your fears, examining them, and realizing that they are more mental constructs than reality issues.
Yeah.
And then once you have that clarity, confidence comes automatically, and then people can then do what works for them.
Correct.
Yeah. So
Thank you so much for this conversation. It's like little brilliant light bulbs going in all places. It's like, wow, it's so simple and we make it so complex.
I know. Well, it took me a long time to make it simple, dear.
Yeah. Thank you
See,
for
no one teaches you this in any school. I think you learn it only in the University of Life.
Yeah. I wonder what can happen to make this like a palpable thing much younger when we are much younger, so that we can actually have access to it.
No, I think with more and more people being willing to examine this, I think we are heading in that direction, slowly but steadily. Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything else that I missed out on asking you? Anything that you would have wanted to talk about?
Not really. Since we did speak about family relationships, dysfunction and conflict and all that, I would like to end with my other model, which I believe is like another, what do you say, good to go for all situations kind of thing. So maybe I can just very quickly talk about that. This is to do with how do you, we spoke about identifying breach of integrity.
Right.
Now, how do you maintain integrity? This is about that. That's the model, right? So this has 5 pillars. It's called the 5-pillar model of intimacy. I want to define intimacy as the state where you bring 100% presence, attention, and regard to this moment in front of you. No more, no less, nothing else. That's intimacy. So right now, you and I are talking. You are 100% focused on me. I'm 100% focused on you. The phones are off. There's no disturbance. There's nothing at all. This is an intimate conversation.
Yes.
That's it. That's all there is.
Mm-hmm.
In this, depending on our relationship, our history, our plans, our hopes, our aspirations, our dreams, whatever it is, we develop slowly the depth to go into how vulnerable I want to be with you and vice versa.
Right.
And that will take us deeper and deeper and deeper into intimacy. That is what it is. So there are components, there are pillars, or there are aspects in the way two people relate, which either enables intimacy or disables intimacy, right? So the first pillar is exclusivity, which I already explained, which is you and I are right now exclusive only to each other. We are not distributing our attention in multiple things or multiple people. So for a relationship to be truly strong and do what it is supposed to do, exclusivity is mandatory, not from an ethical or a moral perspective, from a workable perspective. So this whole idea of open door and checking out and trying this and living that and doing this, it doesn't work. Ultimately, it only feeds therapists like me. We'll have a good practice the more people do this kind of thing, right? So exclusivity is the first pillar. Second pillar is respect. By respect,
Yeah, you're there.
Hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. By respect, what I'm the implicit understanding that just as I, with all my flaws and all my virtues, have a right to exist on this planet, someone else with their virtues and their flaws, even though I can't understand those. It is that basic thing of I'm here, they are here, and we are all here. No judgment, no making something right or wrong, no trying to superimpose something or take out something. Yeah, that's basic respect. This is to do with the yoga principle of ahimsa. This is what is ahimsa. It is about allowing space to something, allowing space to something because it exists. It is there. It is there already. You can't do anything about it. You in fact have to let it be, allowing it to exist. So that is basic respect. So if you regard somebody from that space, the space of deep regard and allowing, already the person will feel respected. So that's the second pillar. Next pillar is care. Care has to do with understanding, or if not understanding, listening to what the other person is asking from you. What do they need from you? And trying to meet it to the extent. Now, in this, there's a caveat. You're not expected to be mind readers or psychics where you can read what they want. This is about the other person taking responsibility to tell you what they are needing. It's an explicit expression of what their expectation is, and trying to meet it in authenticity, in integrity, not by, sacrificing yourself or doing something extraordinary. Just what is possible. And if it's not possible, to authentically say that it is not possible. So that's about care. That's the third pillar. The fourth pillar is trust. Trust, again, it's not about some romantic idea. It's not about infidelity and all. Those are extreme situations. Trust is about the congruence between speech and behavior. So, for example, if I have said to you, I'm going to meet you at 7, then I show up at 7. And if I'm getting delayed, I inform you that I'm getting delayed. It's about staying connected to whatever you have promised or delivering whatever you have said. So behavior and speech congruence is to do with trust. And the last pillar is to do with commitment. Commitment, people have come to think of it as saying yes to a long-term relationship or marriage versus not. This is not about that. That is more to do with exclusivity. Commitment, no matter what we are going to face together, since we are in this, we will do it together. As in, we will play the game from the same side of the net, not as adversaries on the opposite side of it.
Right.
So whatever is happening, let's look at it together. I'm not going to walk out on the problem. I'm not going to walk out on you. That is what is commitment. So exclusivity, respect, care, trust, commitment. These 5 will enable you to maintain integrity for yourself and for the relationship, and hopefully not fall into dysfunction. And what happens is, as you do this, and we do this with mostly people that we are not in too much intimacy with, in terms of closeness of relationships, right? Notice how harmoniously those relationships, and we get into trouble in
Intimate relationships.
that is again to do with what comes up from our, yeah, it has to do with what comes up from our childhood, which is a whole other topic. Maybe we'll do another conversation on that,
Yeah.
which is to do with all the childhood wounding that we go through, and in the way we are brought up. This is not to blame parents. This is to address what happens in the name of parenting worldwide, not just here. I think parents do what they do for the best results, unfortunately cause a lot of damage. So the wounding and how children then adapt to it, and how those children get married more than the adults who are getting married, and how they keep fighting, that's a whole other process. It's to do with trauma work within relationships. Yeah. But I think broadly, if people can follow these 5 pillars, hopefully the relationship should do better. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being in conversation with me.
Thank you, Nivedita. This was a pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that we had this opportunity for such a relaxed and intimate conversation, as I would say.
Yeah.
And I wish you all the best. I wish you all success at whatever you're doing.
Thank you.
And let's stay in touch. And hopefully, soon as we are allowed to get out and have a cup of coffee, let's do that.
Yeah, we'll do. Yeah.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye.